In the restless hum of Union Station, a battle-worn veteran named Daniel Mercer thought it was just another morning patrol with his old German shepherd, Valor. But then, through the tide of travelers, the dog froze, his eyes locked on a small boy holding a woman's hand. 5 gentle taps on her back. Once, twice. A silent signal no one else could see. Within seconds, Valor broke formation, and what he uncovered would shatter everything they thought was ordinary. Chicago woke with a scraped-knuckle sky, the kind that bruised from steel blue to ash as a north wind came knifing down the river canyons and along the tracks. Cold found its way into everything, between limestone blocks, beneath coat collars, under the lids of paper coffee cups, turning breath into pale ghosts and the station's arched glass into a frost-laced cathedral. Union Station, grand as an old brass hymn, thrummed with the rituals of departure. Heels tick-ticking on terrazzo, wheels of suitcases rattling like distant cicadas, announcements swelling and fading above a sea of knit caps and winter coats. Daniel Mercer walked that tide with the careful grace of a man who had learned to place each foot where it meant something. He was 41, long in the shoulders, the sort of lean that comes not from vanity, but from miles. Miles on sand, on gravel, on hospital floors at 3 a.m. The squared angles of his face had softened since the Marines, but still held a map of places he'd been. A crescent scar riding the jaw like a white shoreline, a notch at the eyebrow earned from a Humvee door, and a bad joke. Sun-toughened skin that stayed a stubborn copper even in January. He wore a field-brown canvas jacket stained the way honest tools get stained, a gray watch cap tugged low, and denim that had been repaired more than once by hands that also knew how to reassemble a radio in the dark. His eyes were the giveaway. Steady, observant, kind in a way that made strangers lower their guard. Beside him padded Valor, a German shepherd with wolfish classic lines and a winter pelt that shaded from saddle black to warm sable along the ribs. 11 years old by the books but younger in the joints this morning, Valor moved like a metronome set to trust. Head level, ears tuned, the old K9 vest retired for a softer leather collar, and a plain brass tag rubbed smooth by thumbs. His muzzle salted with dignified gray, one ear kinked at the tip from a youthful argument with a chain-link fence. He carried himself with the unimpeachable composure of a creature who has spent many hours listening to human heartbeats and found them worth guarding. They were not patrolling. Not officially. Daniel had a VA appointment on the west side later, and a list in his pocket that said, batteries, coffee, dog treats, and see about the radiator. Habit made him choose the long way through the great hall, where the ceiling seemed to promise that even in hard weather, there were still high places. It was the sort of morning when the station felt like its own small city. Baristas drawing foam leaves on steam, a newsstand clerk in a Cubs beanie teasing a commuter about last night's score, a janitor polishing an old brass rail until it flashed gold as a coin trick. A college kid with red knuckles wrestled a cello case through a door. An Amtrak conductor with a cathedral-quiet face checked the time and then checked it again. An elderly woman in a violet scarf doled out clementines to 2 bored grandsons with the brisk benevolence of a Sunday school teacher. Valor took it all in with the slow, appreciative sweep of his gaze, as if inventorying the station's soul. That kid needs 2 free hands, that janitor hums the same hymn every Tuesday, that woman's scarf smells faintly of lavender and wood smoke. Daniel, who had learned from the dog to look for patterns rather than problems, reflected dully on the weather and the memory of a desert morning when the air had been so hot you could almost hear the sunlight crackle. The difference between then and now was mostly noise. Out there everything was sharp and cruel and honest. Here everything was soft and crowded and still capable of cutting you anyway. The cold found the old ache in his left shoulder, the one the VA called residual complication, and he called the bill, and he rolled it once, twice, like spooling out a kink. "We'll get through the list and find you something with actual bacon in it," he told Valor in a voice pitched just for dogs and saints. The shepherd blinked and accepted the plan. They drifted toward the concourse where the sound deepened, more trains on the board, more voices layering into the station's weather. The light here was a paler silver, blown through with breath and dust, the sort of light that makes everyone look a little more mortal. Daniel liked it. It had nothing to prove. He passed a transit cop with a thick neck and a friendly nod, the kind of man who keeps his lunch in a brown paper bag and remembers faces better than names. He passed a woman in a green parka, bouncing a baby who wore a hat with bare ears and an expression of cosmic suspicion. He passed a pastry case that fogged softly and sent up the ecclesiastical smell of butter and sugar at vespers. That was when Valor changed. It was small at first, the dog's motion tightening, a subtle gathering of sinew and attention. Then the ears lifted, not the jaunty periscope of curiosity, but the straight, high antennae of focus. His gait slowed until it wasn't a gait at all, just the held-chord stillness of a choir waiting for the downbeat. Daniel felt it travel up the leash and into his hand, not a pull but a pulse. It was the sensation of a quiet room when someone drops a single coin on the floor in the next room. Barely a sound, unmistakable. He followed the line of Valor's regard across the living mosaic of coats and hats, past a knot of tourists studying a map upside down, past a vendor's rack turning with paper bird laziness, and found the point it fixed upon. A woman in black moved through the crowd like a pencil mark through a charcoal sketch, clear and deliberate. She was mid-30s, tall enough that the long coat didn't swallow her, with posture so upright it seemed rehearsed. The coat itself was city-sharp, belted tight, fabric with a subtle herringbone. The gloves matched, good leather polished by worry. At her throat a narrow strip of cream silk, pretended warmth it did not possess. Her hair was raven dark and drawn back into a neat, low knot that suggested she disliked loose ends in more than just style. Her face was pleasing in a way catalog models are pleasing, until you look for the human in the geometry. Fine bones, straight nose, a mouth that wore a non-committal pleasantness like a badge. Not pretty, not plain, optimized. But her eyes betrayed the optimization. They were a gray that could be friendly if the day asked nicely, and this day hadn't. They flicked and measured, briefly skimming corners, reflective like wet slate. In her left hand, she held a small black handbag that bulged oddly in the middle. The distortion not of too much makeup, but of the wrong kind of object for a handbag. In her right, she held the hand of a boy. The boy was 6, maybe 7, at that in-between height where children seem to have grown overnight and forgot to tell their sleeves. He wore a navy puffer with a missing pull tab and a patch at the elbow shaped like a rocket. His jeans were clean, his sneakers were starting to unship the rubber from canvas at the toes. He was fair-haired in the way that makes winter light kinder, cowlick turned stubbornly north, and there was a faint crescent of playground grit along one cheek, as if he had slipped yesterday and decided not to mention it. His face was round, yet beginning to angle itself toward boyhood. His mouth was drawn so tight it started to look like adulthood by mistake. He held a small stuffed bear by the leg, the poor thing's fur gone to felt at the seams, and one eye replaced by a very earnest button. The bear swung with each step like a silent metronome, counting down to something only it knew. When children are content, their bodies tell the story in loose, stitched language, feet that wander, shoulders that wiggle, a head on a swivel to collect miracles like pigeons on a plaza. This boy moved with a different grammar. He stayed exactly 1/2 step behind the woman, as if good behavior had been described to him as a shadow. His shoulders sat too high, a turtle's startle stuck there. He looked at the floor, and then at nothing, and then at everything, and never at her face. Daniel did not yet think the word danger. He thought the words wrong music. Valor thought nothing at all. Dogs do not think the way we do. He observed. He registered a scent ribbon tucked among thousands, laundry clean and perfume cool, the lemon sting of rubber elevator buttons on too many hands, but also the pale ammoniac tang of fear, the faint tin of adrenaline that bodies exhale when they are preparing for either flight or compliance. He saw the boy's fingers, small as sparrow claws, open and close, then lift and do something that would have looked like fidgeting to anyone not looking very closely. The boy tapped the back of the woman's coat 5 times, gentle, rhythmic, not a drum, more like a moth finding a lamp. Tap, 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 tap. Then a pause, the length of a held breath. Then again, exactly the same. Valor became a statue with a heartbeat. Daniel's own breath did that curious thing it had learned in dust storms and ER waiting rooms. It shortened to make room for attention. He stepped slightly to the woman's left, with the casual theater of a man about to ask for directions. "Excuse me," he said, voice leveled at Midwestern helpful. "Is the Canal Street exit that way, or am I walking into a closet?" The woman's head pivoted a fraction, and up close the gloss of her poise looked more like lacquer over grain. "That way," she said, and her smile appeared on schedule and left before any feeling could catch it. Her voice had no accent the ear could name, which itself is a kind of accent. The boy glanced up at Daniel without full permission, and in that fraction of a second Daniel saw eyes like early lake ice, clear, blue, untrustworthy only because the world around them had been. There was a plea and a calculation, and a very small ember of hope cupped in both hands behind those eyes. "Thanks," Daniel said, and then, to the boy with a conspirator's shrug, "Good rocket patch." The boy's mouth remembered that it could soften, then forgot again. The bear swung. The woman's gloved fingers tightened, and the cords stood out in the back of the glove like hidden wire. Somewhere behind them, the board updated with clacking confidence. Somewhere to the right, someone laughed too loud at a text and cut it shorter with a hand to the mouth. Somewhere above, a pigeon that had cheated the doors fluttered and then reconsidered flight. Daniel moved a half step with them, adjusting stride to theirs without crowding. Valor didn't move at all. Daniel felt the line of the leash tauten into a question. He let it be a question. He had once been briefed that sometimes a signal will not look like a signal. It will look like a child doing what a child must, so that a stranger might understand a sentence too dangerous to say aloud. The boy tapped again. 5. Patient as beads. Daniel's skin prickled the way it does when your name is spoken in a room you cannot see. He didn't reach for the woman. He reached for coincidence. "Ma'am," he said lightly, "you dropped this." And he extended an empty hand just enough to interrupt motion, just enough to invite a look down and away from the boy, and toward a man who was nobody, who wanted nothing, who might nevertheless do something. For a syllable's length, the choreography held. Her glance downward, the boy's breath toward him, Valor's ears angling to knife edge. In a world nudged along by momentum, stillness can be the loudest thing. The station breathed once, all together. Valor's tail stiffened into a line. Daniel's shoulders squared as if a weight he could not yet name had just asked to be carried. And in the crowded, ordinary holiness of that morning, something that looked like fate reached out and touched the back of a woman's coat with 5 small taps that sounded, to one old dog, like a bell. Daniel kept his tone casual, though every nerve in his body had turned to tuning wire. He'd learned long ago that trouble never announces itself. It just changes the temperature of the air. And right now, the air around him felt colder, tighter, the way the desert used to feel a second before an ambush. The woman's polite smile returned, as if summoned by muscle memory. "Thank you, but we're fine," she said, her voice even and practiced, the kind of voice that had soothed strangers before and now tried to build a wall. Her gray eyes flicked once toward the security cameras along the archway and back, calculating the geometry of escape. She tightened her grip on the boy's hand, her leather gloves creasing white at the knuckles. Noah, the name surfaced, uninvited, maybe read on a forgotten tag, maybe guessed by instinct, kept his gaze down. But then it came again. 5 taps. Tiny, deliberate, and impossible to mistake once you knew. Daniel's military brain mapped it instantly, 5 in Morse or SOS. His breath hitched, valor stood rigid, his tail straight as a ruler, chest expanding with the slow, deliberate inhale of a trained responder. The dog's eyes flicked to Daniel, asking the question without sound. Daniel nodded once, almost imperceptibly. They had done this dance before. Man and dog, reading each other through silence. The crowd flowed around them, oblivious to the moment coiling like wire. A businessman brushed past, mumbling apologies. A teenage girl in a denim jacket laughed into her phone. Normality carried on, like background music that made danger sound unreal. The woman started walking faster, heels clicking like a metronome of anxiety. Daniel followed at a measured pace, matching her rhythm without spooking her, valor gliding at his side with the silent authority of an old sentinel. As they neared the waiting area, Daniel caught sight of a transit officer standing near the ticket gates. He was mid-30s, slightly overweight, with a square jaw and the kind of cautious kindness that suggested he'd rather de-escalate than enforce. His name tag read, Perez. Daniel raised a hand in greeting. "Morning, officer," he called, forcing warmth into his voice. Perez turned, smiling automatically. "Morning, sir. Can I help you?" Daniel took 2 quick steps closer. "Maybe. Keep an eye on the woman in black heading to Gate 14. Something's off." Perez followed the direction of Daniel's chin, eyes narrowing as he spotted her. "Off how?" "Can't say yet," Daniel murmured. "My dog's picking up something. And that kid—" Before he could finish, Perez gave a short nod, his expression changing from curiosity to alert professionalism. He spoke quietly into his radio, the clipped language of a man trained to stay calm under suspicion. "Copy. I'll shadow discreetly." Daniel's respect for him ticked up a notch. As Perez moved, Daniel resumed his role. Just another traveler with a slow gait and a loyal dog. Valor's ears tracked everything. The swish of the woman's coat, the squeak of a child's shoe, the rhythm of heartbeats too fast to belong to calm people. The crowd began to thin near the end of the concourse, where sunlight spilled like honey through tall windows. Daniel could see the woman checking her wristwatch too often, lips moving faintly as though rehearsing. Noah, half hidden beside her, was trembling in small, rhythmic waves, trying to look normal and failing. The boy's stuffed bear slipped from his grip, bouncing once on the polished floor. Without thinking, Daniel stepped forward, scooping it up. "Hey, you dropped!" The woman spun so fast it startled him. "It's fine," she said sharply, snatching the bear from his hand before the boy could touch it. Her voice cracked on the last syllable. "We're in a hurry." "No problem, ma'am," Daniel said easily, holding her gaze for a heartbeat longer than polite. Up close, he saw the faint tremor in her jawline, the quick pulse jumping at her throat. Not fear of him, exactly. Fear of being seen. She turned away, practically towing Noah now. Valor let out a soft sound, half whine, half growl, the sound of a question too urgent to ignore. Daniel crouched beside him, hand brushing the collar. "Easy, buddy," he whispered. "I see it too." When they moved again, he kept one eye on Perez, who had begun following from a distance, pretending to check tickets. The woman and child passed through the waiting area toward the rear exit. A few benches lined the wall there, occupied by travelers waiting for late trains. A middle-aged man in a navy suit asleep behind a newspaper, 2 college students arguing over snacks, and a cleaner wiping down the tile with slow, steady strokes. Normal life, again. But Valor's attention never wavered. The boy looked back once more. Quick, fearful, almost desperate. Daniel caught his eye and gave the smallest nod, a silent promise that someone had heard him. The boy's lower lip trembled, but he straightened his shoulders like a soldier in miniature. The woman guided him toward the exit door, pressing the silver handle. Just before they disappeared into the glare of the morning, Valor moved. It wasn't a lunge, not yet, just a step forward, deliberate and commanding, the leash going taut like a drawn bowstring. Daniel's reflexes caught up half a second later. "Valor," he said sharply. The dog froze mid-stride, vibrating with suppressed instinct. The woman turned halfway, trying to mask her alarm with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Does he bite?" she asked. "Only when someone's in trouble," Daniel replied, smiling back. The line landed heavier than he intended. She blinked, then hurried through the door. Perez came jogging up beside Daniel. "You want to tell me what that was?" he asked quietly. "A signal," Daniel said. 5 taps, twice. You know what that means?" Perez frowned. "Kidnap code?" "Could be. In the Corps, 5 repeated patterns meant distress or call for help. The dog reacted first. I trust him." Perez exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, I'll call this in, quietly." He lifted his radio again, tone even but clipped. "Possible child endangerment, female suspect, black coat, exiting gate 14 west side. K9 assist on site." As Perez spoke, Daniel's eyes never left the glass door. Beyond it, he could see the woman steering Noah down the steps toward the taxi lane. Valor pressed against his leg, muscles twitching under the fur. The veteran's gut twisted with memory. Another child, another war zone, the one time he'd ignored instinct and paid for it in sleepless years. "Not this time," he muttered. He motioned to Perez. "You take the left flank. I'll go right, keep it calm." They exited into the cold morning air. Diesel exhaust hung low, mixing with the metallic scent of the city. Cabs lined the curb, drivers calling fares in a half-dozen accents. The woman scanned the street, eyes darting. Daniel saw her raise a hand, not for a cab, but as if signaling someone unseen across the road. A dark sedan idled near the curb, windows tinted. Valor's low growl deepened into a rumble that could be felt more than heard. "There," Daniel whispered. Perez keyed his mic again. "Vehicle assistance. Black sedan by the north pillar." The radio crackled in response. "Back up en route." The woman's composure began to splinter. She tugged the boy harder. "Come on, Noah," she hissed, urgency finally leaking through her mask. The boy stumbled but didn't cry out. Daniel stepped forward. "Ma'am," she flinched, half turning. "What?" "You forgot your bag," he said, pointing behind her. For the briefest moment she looked, pure instinct, and in that sliver of distraction Perez closed the distance. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay right there," he said firmly, badge raised. The woman froze, the practiced calm draining from her face. Her hand tightened around the boy's arm. Valor barked once, the sharp, commanding bark of authority. The boy didn't startle. He looked relieved. Daniel reached out slowly. "It's okay, kid," he said. "You did good." But the woman's eyes darted wildly now, calculating every direction but the right one. For a heartbeat, everything held. The hum of engines, the hiss of wind through the underpass, the stare of one veteran who had seen too many situations just like this. The world narrowed to 3 heartbeats, one steady, one frantic, one unbreakable. Then the woman whispered, "You don't understand," and tried to bolt. Perez moved first, hand closing on her arm. Daniel steadied Noah with a gentle grip on his shoulder. The sedan door flew open. Someone inside shouted. Valor lunged. The chapter ended not in chaos but in certainty, the kind of certainty born from a dog's instinct and a soldier's decision to trust it again. The sound of the woman's boots clattered against the pavement as she tried to pull the boy away. The morning wind sliced between taxis, carrying the faint metallic sting of exhaust and tension. Daniel could feel Valor's leash vibrate in his hand. The tremor wasn't aggression. It was certainty. The German shepherd took one deliberate step forward, his broad chest a barrier of calm defiance, eyes locked on the woman like he'd seen this pattern 100 times before. Daniel's gut twisted the way it had in Fallujah, when he'd learned that silence could be the loudest warning of all. The woman yanked harder on the boy's hand. "We're leaving," she snapped, voice cracking on the word "we." The boy stumbled, caught his balance, and lifted his chin. His eyes, wide, glass blue and glass fragile, met Daniel's. There it was again. The same 5 taps against the woman's sleeve. Noah didn't cry or call for help. He just looked at Daniel as if asking him to read a language that had no words. Daniel had seen those eyes before. Not Noah's, but others. Soldiers fresh from fire. Children from burned-out villages. The look of someone too young to understand fear, but old enough to feel its shape. "Ma'am," Daniel said evenly, "maybe you should wait. There's a security concern." "Concern?" She cut him off. "You're harassing us. I said we're fine." Her voice trembled on the last word, the kind of tremor that came from adrenaline and guilt, not outrage. Perez stepped up beside Daniel, his hand near his radio but his tone calm. "Ma'am, please, no one's accusing you of anything. We just need to make sure the boy's all right." The woman's gray eyes darted between the 2 men, measuring distance, exit points, odds. She was tall but lean, the fabric of her coat twitching with every heartbeat. Up close, Daniel saw faint makeup cracks near her temples, as if her composure had been painted on too fast. "I told you, he's my son," she said, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "And we have a train to catch." The lie landed like a dull thud. Perez gestured toward the boy. "Buddy, you okay?" Noah's lips moved, but no sound came out. He pressed the bear against his chest, fingers trembling. Valor's tail stiffened, his ears angled forward, listening to what humans couldn't. Tiny shifts in breath, the hitch of panic, the quiet code of fear. Daniel crouched beside the dog, his hand brushing over the fur at his neck. "Easy, boy," he whispered. "We're just reading the room." Valor exhaled through his nose, a slow, rumbling sigh, his eyes never leaving the boy. The woman shifted, her posture tilting subtly toward escape. Daniel recognized it immediately, that half-turn of someone who was about to run. "Perez," he murmured without looking. "She's going to bolt." "Got it," Perez said under his breath. He wasn't fast, but his stance widened slightly, one hand on his belt. He looked like a man ready to move, but hoping not to. From across the street, a yellow cab idled at the curb. The driver, a man in his late 40s with dark skin and a Detroit Tigers cap, leaned out of his window, curious. His name tag read Mahmoud, his beard neatly trimmed, eyes kind but sharp. "Everything okay?" he called in a mild accent. "She needs a cab?" The woman froze. "Yes," she said quickly. "Yes, that's ours." Her voice was suddenly too bright, like a light switched on in a dark room. Perez took a slow step forward. "Ma'am, please wait a second." But before he could finish, she shoved Noah ahead and lunged for the cab door. Valor barked once, deep and thunderous, the kind of bark that vibrated through concrete and made everyone stop breathing for a heartbeat. The cabbie flinched. Perez reached for her arm. Daniel didn't move fast. He moved precise. His hand shot out, not to grab her, but to steady Noah, who had nearly fallen. "I got you, buddy," he said softly. The boy looked up again, tears trembling in his lashes, lips parted as if to say something. He didn't need to. His fear spoke louder. Valor stepped closer, lowering his head just enough to put himself between Noah and the woman. The woman hesitated, the strength in her arm faltering. "You don't understand," she hissed, her face flickering between anger and desperation. "If I don't get him on that train, they'll—" She cut herself off, swallowing the rest. "They'll what?" Daniel pressed, voice gentle but steel-lined. Her breath hitched, her pupils shrank to pinpoints. "Nothing. Let us go." Perez's radio crackled softly. "Back up en route," came the dispatcher's calm reply. The woman heard it. Her mask cracked. Panic spread across her face like frost under glass. She jerked backward, but Valor moved first, stepping sideways to block her path again, posture steady, mouth closed, tail rigid. The dog's restraint was perfect, trained, disciplined, unreadable to anyone but Daniel. "You don't want to do this," Perez said, keeping his voice low. "If you're scared, we can help." She shook her head violently. "You can't. None of you can." Then her composure broke completely. She spun, trying to dart around the cab's rear bumper. Perez caught the edge of her sleeve. She twisted, shouting. Noah cried out, not in fear, but in protest, as though he wanted to explain everything but didn't have the words. Daniel moved to him, crouching low, eye level. "It's okay," he said, calm as prayer. "You're safe, all right? You did good." Noah blinked, tears spilling freely now. She said, "We're going to meet my dad," he whispered. Daniel's stomach turned to ice. He'd heard that line before, from traffickers who rehearsed comfort like a script. Behind him, Perez had restrained the woman against the side of the cab. She wasn't fighting anymore, just trembling. Her face, now stripped of control, looked younger and older at once, hollowed by exhaustion and something close to regret. "I didn't want this," she murmured. "I just—" Her words dissolved. Perez glanced at Daniel. "What now?" "We wait for backup," Daniel said quietly, eyes never leaving Noah. "And we keep the boy close." Valor settled beside them, sitting tall, the city light catching the silver in his fur. His breathing slowed, steady again, mission complete for now. The cab driver, still frozen by the scene, finally stepped out, his expression tangled between concern and disbelief. "Man, that dog," he said softly. "He knew before any of us?" Daniel gave a small, weary smile. "He always does." The station behind them buzzed faintly, a distant hum of normal life continuing, unaware that in this small pocket of chaos, a silent language had just saved a child. The wind carried the sound of approaching sirens, thin, rising, inevitable. Perez released the woman's arm but stood close. She slumped against the cab, staring at the ground, her voice barely audible. "You think you saved him," she said bitterly, "but you have no idea what's coming." Daniel didn't answer. He just placed a steady hand on Valor's head, feeling the warmth under the fur, the heartbeat of loyalty that never wavered. He turned toward the boy, who clutched the bear against his chest, and nodded. "You're all right now," he said softly. "We've got you." And in the cold wind between sirens and truth, the veteran realized the fear he'd seen wasn't only the child's, it was the echo of his own, finally understood through the eyes of a dog who had never once been wrong. The moment the sirens drew close, the woman in black broke. Her calm face fractured, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. She shoved against Perez's grip, twisting her body with surprising strength for her size. But Daniel was faster. Years of training collapsed into one instinctive move. He caught her by the wrist, pivoted, and pulled her off balance just as Valor lunged, not to bite, but to corner. The German shepherd planted himself in front of her, his deep bark cutting through the chaos like a gunshot. The crowd that had gathered near the taxi line stepped back, their murmurs blending into the city's background hum. Perez wrestled the woman's arms behind her back while Daniel steadied Noah, who stood frozen beside the cab, his small hands shaking so violently the stuffed bear nearly slipped from his grip. The woman's coat tore at the shoulder as she struggled. "You don't know what you're doing!" she screamed, her gray eyes wide with fury or fear. It was hard to tell which. "You're making a mistake." "You made it first," Daniel said, his voice flat, unflinching. Perez secured the cuffs with a practiced snap. "You're done, lady," he muttered, catching his breath. "Let's see what's in the bag." She froze. The moment Perez reached for her black handbag, she twisted again, shouting, "Don't touch that!" But Valor growled low, warning her to stay still. Daniel knelt and picked up the bag from where it had fallen near the curb. It was heavier than it looked, the leather scuffed around the edges. He placed it on the hood of the cab and unzipped it slowly. The sound of the zipper stretched thin in the air. Inside lay a jumble of ordinary things: makeup, a brush, a folded scarf. But beneath those, Daniel saw a small envelope sealed with tape. He tore it open. Out slid a stack of glossy photographs. His heart tightened. The first photo showed a girl no older than 10, sitting on a park bench. The next, a boy leaning against a school fence. Then another, and another. 11 children in all, each from a different background, each caught by a camera that shouldn't have been watching. Perez leaned over his shoulder. "Jesus," he whispered. Daniel felt his jaw clench. He reached deeper into the bag, pulling out a small, cheap cell phone with its SIM card slot pried open and empty. A faint residue of adhesive lined the back cover. "No SIM," he muttered. "Burner phone." The woman's breath hitched audibly. She was shaking now, no longer fighting, just trembling like someone whose mask had finally slipped. "I didn't hurt them," she said, her voice suddenly smaller. "You have to believe me." Perez shot Daniel a look, then turned back to her. "You're telling us this bag full of kids' pictures belongs to someone else?" She didn't answer. Her shoulders slumped. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered. "They don't let you stop. Once you start, you belong to them." "Who's them?" Daniel asked quietly. She shook her head, lips pressed tight. "You can't save me," she said. "They'll find me. They always do." Perez ran a hand through his short, dark hair, frustration flickering across his face. "I'll call it in," he said, stepping aside to radio headquarters. Daniel remained still, eyes locked on the woman. She was younger than he'd thought, maybe mid-30s. Without the makeup and precision of her earlier calm, her skin looked pale and uneven, her features drawn with fatigue. She reminded him, uncomfortably, of people he'd met overseas, those who'd done terrible things because someone else owned their fear. You didn't choose this, did you? He asked. Her gray eyes lifted slowly to meet his. For a flicker of a second, something like recognition crossed her face. No, she whispered. But choice doesn't matter when they own your name. The police arrived moments later, a cruiser and a van. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. The taller one, Officer Leland, was in his 40s, with a shaved head and calm brown eyes that carried an undertone of weariness. He'd seen too many arrests like this. The other, Officer Martinez, was younger, sharp-featured with a neat mustache, still carrying the restless energy of someone early in his career. Who's the arresting officer? Leland asked briskly. Perez raised a hand. That'd be me. She resisted, but we got her. Charges? Abduction attempt, possible trafficking link, Daniel said, handing over the bag. Evidence is inside. Leland opened it carefully, gloved hands sifting through the contents. When he saw the photographs, his jaw tightened. Damn, he murmured. This is bad. Martinez pulled out a small notebook and started jotting details. We'll get this logged and sent to the task force. Daniel stepped back, giving them space. Valor stayed close, ears twitching at every sudden sound. He could sense Daniel's unease, the way his handler's breathing had gone shallow. The dog pressed lightly against his leg, grounding him. You did good, Daniel said softly, resting a hand on Valor's head. Perez returned, lowering his radio. Command wants the woman transported downtown, he said. Dwyer's on her way. She'll take over the case personally. Daniel nodded, still staring at the bag. There's more, he said. If she's part of a ring, those photos aren't just trophies, they're an inventory. Perez exhaled, shaking his head. I hate how you're probably right. Within minutes, Sergeant Dwyer's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing silently. She stepped out, her coat whipping in the wind, expression as composed as ever. Report, she said. Perez summarized quickly, handing her the bag. She examined the photos one by one, her green eyes narrowing. Looks like another network connected to the Detroit case, she said. Same. Type of phone? Same pattern? You've seen this before? Daniel asked. Too many times, she replied quietly. They use women like her. Someone clean, unnoticed, usually promised money or a way out. By the time they realize what they're in, it's too late. Dwyer looked at the woman, who stood cuffed beside the cruiser, her posture sagging under invisible weight. Name? She gave us Emily, Perez said. No ID yet, Dwyer sighed. Probably fake. We'll print her downtown. She turned to Daniel. You okay? Yeah, he said, though it sounded unconvincing even to him. His eyes drifted to Noah, who had moved closer, clutching Valor's fur. The boy was pale but calm, watching everything with solemn awareness far beyond his years. You did good, kid, Daniel said gently. You stayed brave. Noah nodded, his voice barely audible. She said we were going to meet my dad. Dwyer's expression softened briefly. We'll make sure you get home, sweetheart, she said. You're safe now. 2 officers guided the woman toward the cruiser. She didn't resist this time. As the car doors shut, Daniel caught one last glimpse of her face through the glass. She wasn't angry anymore, just afraid. Dwyer turned to Perez and Daniel. This isn't over, she said. Where there's one, there's more, and whoever's behind her, he's still out there. Daniel looked down at the bag again. The photos stared back up at him, children caught in frozen smiles, unaware they'd been marked for something unthinkable. Valor pressed closer, his head brushing Daniel's hand as if to remind him the world wasn't entirely lost. The sirens flared once more as the cruiser pulled away, carrying the woman and the truth that would haunt them long after this cold morning was gone. The storm had not yet broken, but the sky above the Indiana outskirts trembled with the weight of it. Daniel sat in the back of the unmarked police SUV, his gaze fixed on the flickering lights that streaked across the windshield. The rhythmic hum of the engine mixed with the steady panting of Valor, whose golden black fur gleamed faintly under the dim interior light. The German shepherd sat tall and still beside him, eyes fixed on the horizon, ears twitching at every crack of thunder. He was 7 years old, his muzzle touched with silver, his body still carved from muscle and loyalty. Daniel reached down and brushed his hand across the dog's collar. "You smell it too, don't you, boy?" Valor gave a low, rumbling sound of acknowledgement. In the front seats, Sergeant Dwyer and Detective Hale spoke quietly over the radio. Dwyer, with her auburn hair tied into a tight bun, had that controlled stillness of someone who'd spent years balancing authority with empathy. Her green eyes flicked towards the mirror. "Signal triangulated," she said. "Last ping came from a warehouse near the state line. No power on the grid, but there's movement inside." Hale grunted in reply. He was a man built like a wall, late 40s, broad-shouldered, with deep lines etched into his dark skin from years of field work. His short black hair was speckled with gray, his jaw shadowed with a day's stubble. "These places," he said, voice low. "Always the same smell, oil, dust, and bad memories." Dwyer shot him a brief look. "Stay sharp, Marcus. We don't know what we're walking into." He gave a dry smile. "We never do." The SUV rolled off the road and into an abandoned lot. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted frame sagging beneath decades of neglect. Broken windows gaped like hollow eyes, and the faint pulse of a generator throbbed from somewhere inside. The wind pushed at the weeds around the fence, carrying the scent of metal and rain. Dwyer killed the headlights and parked. "We move quiet," she said. "No sirens, no lights. Daniel, you and Valor take point. He picks up anything, you stop." Daniel nodded. He opened the door, and the cold air slapped his face. The smell of old machinery mixed with the dampness of decay. Valor leapt out, landing soundlessly on the gravel. His posture changed instantly, from calm companion to focused sentinel. Daniel moved beside him, his steps measured, his senses tuned. He had done this before, in deserts and alleys, in war zones where silence meant survival. Behind them, Hale and Dwyer advanced with flashlights dimmed and weapons drawn. The air inside the warehouse was heavy with moisture. Daniel could hear the drip of water leaking through a broken roof, the faint hum of that unseen generator, and beneath it, a softer sound. A whimper. Valor stopped dead, his ears pricked, tail rigid. He glanced back at Daniel, eyes sharp as amber glass. Daniel crouched, his whisper steady. "Show me, buddy." The shepherd padded forward, nose low, weaving between stacks of old crates and twisted pipes. His nails clicked faintly against the concrete, a rhythm that somehow felt like a heartbeat. They reached a narrow hallway lined with half-collapsed walls. A steel door stood at the end, chained but not locked. Faint light glowed from beneath it, a sickly yellow, flickering. Valor pressed his nose against the bottom and gave a short, deliberate bark. Daniel froze. Dwyer came up beside him, her weapon raised. Hale moved to the opposite side, flashlight steady. "On your count," Dwyer said. Daniel took a deep breath, gripped the latch, and pulled. The chain clattered as the door swung open with a shriek of rust. For a heartbeat, there was only darkness and the smell of mildew. Then the flashlight beam cut across the room, revealing 5 children huddled in the corner, eyes wide, faces streaked with dirt and tears. Their small forms trembled under thin blankets, their wrists bound loosely with zip ties. One of them, A boy with freckles and cropped blonde hair blinked against the light and whispered, "Are you the police?" Dwyer stepped forward, voice gentle but firm. "You're safe now," she said. "No one's going to hurt you." The children began to cry, not loud, not wailing, but the quiet kind of sob that breaks adults more than screams ever could. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He crouched and cut the ties from the nearest girl, maybe 8 years old, dark-skinned, wearing a faded t-shirt with a unicorn print. "It's okay," he murmured. "We've got you." Valor lowered himself beside the children, his presence immediately calming them. One small boy reached out, hesitant, and touched the dog's fur. Valor didn't move, didn't even blink. He simply exhaled softly, a living anchor in the storm of fear. Dwyer turned toward Hale. "Get on the radio. We need medics and child services. Now!" Hale nodded and stepped back into the hall, voice low and urgent as he spoke into the comm. Daniel continued freeing the children. "Were there others here?" he asked quietly. One of the girls shook her head. Another, a boy with dark curls, pointed toward a broken window. "They left," he said. "A car. Black. It was loud." Daniel's pulse quickened. "How long ago?" "Just before you came," the boy whispered. Outside, the low growl of an engine suddenly echoed through the rain. Dwyer cursed under her breath. "They're still close," she said, snapping her radio to her shoulder. "Unit 3, eyes on a possible black SUV heading east from our location. Pursue with caution." Hale emerged from the hallway, face grim. "Backup's 5 minutes out." Daniel moved toward the door, scanning the yard. Through the slats of broken metal, he saw it. A black SUV speeding down the service road, its taillights slicing through the rain like twin embers. "They're running," he said. Dwyer raised her weapon, slightly, her voice tight. "We can't chase. We've got kids here." Daniel hesitated, his instincts torn between pursuit and protection. Valor whined softly, the sound low, almost questioning. Daniel looked back at the children, huddled around the dog, and made his choice. "We stay," he said. "We keep them safe." Dwyer gave a curt nod. "Good call." The SUV's roar faded into the distance, leaving behind the hiss of rain and the faint, uneven breathing of the rescued. Hale returned from outside, rain streaking down his face. "Plates unregistered," he said, "but we'll find them. They can't hide forever." Daniel stood in the doorway, watching the horizon swallow the last trace of red light. He felt Valor's head press against his leg, steady and solid. "We'll get them, partner," he whispered. "We always do." Outside, thunder rolled at last, heavy and final, as if the storm itself had been waiting for the truth to be found. Rain began to fall, just as the black SUV disappeared into the maze of wet streets. The sound of the tires cutting through water echoed off the warehouse walls, mixing with the faint cries of rescued children and the shouts of officers securing the scene. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Valor, go!" he commanded, unclipping the leash. The German shepherd bolted forward like a shot of lightning through the dark. 11 years old but built from steel and loyalty, his muscles moved with a rhythm that defied age. Daniel sprinted after him, boots splashing through puddles, breath cutting the cold night like a blade. Sergeant Dwyer shouted behind him, ordering a perimeter lock, but Daniel's focus tunneled in on the fleeing taillights flickering red through the fog. Detective Hale jumped into his unmarked Dodge Charger, the engine roaring to life. "Get in!" he yelled, leaning over the console. Daniel leapt inside without a word, rain dripping from his jacket. The car fishtailed onto the slick road as Hale gunned the accelerator. "He's got a lead," Hale muttered. "We'll lose him if—" "We won't," Daniel said, eyes on Valor sprinting ahead through the storm. The dog was barely a shadow now, a streak of motion slicing between light and rain. Hale stole a glance. "That animal's insane." Daniel gave a thin smile. "No, he's just doing his job." Ahead, the SUV swerved sharply, tires squealing. Its rear door swung open, and for a brief second, Daniel saw a man lean out, a heavy-set figure in a dark jacket, face obscured, aiming something metallic toward Valor. "Gun!" Daniel shouted. Hale jerked the wheel hard as a flash split the air. The gun fired once, echoing like thunder. Valor didn't stop. He dove left, mud spraying from under his paws, then cut across the alley's mouth to intercept. "He's gonna try to block the street," Daniel yelled. "Keep parallel." Hale slammed the brakes, spun the wheel, and the Charger drifted sideways, headlights slicing across the asphalt. The SUV barreled toward an intersection, horn blaring, the gunman now shouting inside the car. Daniel's heart pounded in his ears. He could feel every old injury ache, every scar from the war pulse alive again. This wasn't combat, but it was close enough. Then, through the sheet of rain, he saw it. Valor, sprinting through the open lot, soaked to the bone, eyes fixed ahead. The SUV roared past, but the driver didn't see the shadow lunging from the side. Valor hit the door with bone-rattling force. His jaws clamped onto the driver's arm through the open window. The man screamed, jerking the wheel instinctively. The vehicle fishtailed, skidding over the slick road, its tires losing grip. Hale swerved to avoid the crash, cursing under his breath. "He's got him!" Daniel yelled. The SUV slammed into a chain-link fence, sparks flying as the metal twisted. Daniel jumped out before the car fully stopped. "Valor!" he called. The Hafo Shepard released the driver and backed away, growling low but steady, every hair on his wet fur standing up. The man stumbled out of the wreck, clutching his bleeding forearm. He was large, mid-40s, bald, with a thick neck and a jagged scar running across his cheek, a mark that told stories of violence and survival. He spat blood into the rain, sneering. "You think you stopped it? There are more of us." Daniel raised his sidearm, but didn't fire. Hale came up from behind, gun drawn, his voice cold. "Yeah, but you're the one who's done running." The man lunged suddenly, desperate, but Valor moved first. He hit the suspect square in the chest, pinning him into the mud. Daniel called out, "Hold, Valor." The Shepherd froze instantly, keeping the man pinned but unharmed. Hale cuffed the suspect and yanked him upright. "You just bit into your last paycheck, pal," Hale muttered. The man laughed, a deep, hollow sound that carried no humor. "You don't even know what you've walked into." His accent was faintly Eastern European, his teeth yellowed from smoke. Hale shoved him against the hood of the SUV. "Then why don't you enlighten us?" The man only smirked. "Ask your government." Dwyer arrived seconds later with 2 squad cars, her hair plastered to her forehead, uniform soaked. "Report!" she barked. Daniel gestured toward the wreck. "One in custody. Valor took him down." She glanced at the Shepherd, whose chest heaved with exhaustion. "You're one hell of a partner," she murmured. Then, to Daniel, "Get him checked. He's bleeding." Daniel knelt beside Valor, running his hands through the wet fur until he found a small graze on the dog's shoulder where the bullet had nicked him. "You crazy old soldier," Daniel whispered, voice breaking with pride. Valor looked up, eyes half-lidded but calm, the rain dripping from his muzzle like silver threads. Paramedics arrived, one of them, a young man named Eli Grant, mid-20s, sandy hair, freckled skin, and a kind of nervous compassion in his face, knelt beside Daniel. "We'll patch him up, sir," Eli said gently. "He's tough. I've seen working dogs survive worse." "Yeah," Daniel said quietly, "but he's earned his rest." Hale approached, handing Daniel a small evidence bag. Inside was a key fob taken from the SUV. "They were headed somewhere," he said. "Probably another drop site. We'll trace it." Dwyer stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the suspect loaded into a cruiser. "Feds will want him. This isn't just state level. Look at the coordination. Phones, routes, vehicles." She shook her head. "It's a network." Daniel rose, rain streaming down his face. "Then we tear it down piece by piece." Hale nodded slowly. "Starting with him." The suspect sneered through the back window as the cruiser pulled away, its red and blue lights fading into the wet distance. For a long time, no one spoke. The rain softened to a mist. Dwyer finally broke the silence. "You and that dog. You just saved 5 kids tonight. That's more than most people do in a lifetime." Daniel glanced at Valor, who stood quietly beside him, fur slick against muscle, eyes still scanning the horizon like the soldier he once was. "He didn't save 5, Daniel said softly. "He saved me too." The others said nothing. In the glow of the wreck's hazard lights, Daniel knelt and pressed his forehead gently against Valor's. "Good job, boy," he whispered. The dog's tail flicked once, slow and tired, as if acknowledging the words. The rain began to wash the blood from the pavement, leaving only the echo of sirens and the steady heartbeat of a city that would never know how close it came to losing 5 of its children. The dawn broke quietly over Union Station, casting long golden streaks across the marble floor that only hours ago had echoed with panic, sirens, and the sound of rain-soaked boots. Now it was calm again, the kind of calm that comes after a storm has finally decided to leave. Daniel Mercer stood by the large window near the Terminal Cafe, his brown leather jacket still damp at the collar, a styrofoam cup of coffee cooling in his hand. The lines on his face looked deeper in the soft light, but there was a gentleness in his eyes, a quiet peace that hadn't been there the night before. Beside him, Valor sat upright, his fur brushed clean, the small wound on his shoulder neatly bandaged. The 11-year-old German shepherd was calm but alert, his amber eyes following every movement in the bustling terminal. He looked older that morning, but also somehow eternal, as if time itself hesitated to touch him. The scent of baked bread drifted from a nearby cafe where morning commuters began to trickle in, unaware that the station they stood in had been the center of a rescue that would soon make national headlines. Sergeant Karen Dwyer approached from behind, her auburn hair pulled into a tight braid, her uniform freshly pressed, but her eyes showing the fatigue of a sleepless night. "You didn't go home," she said. Daniel turned slightly, giving a faint smile. "Didn't seem right to leave before it was over." "It's over," Dwyer said softly, though her voice carried the tone of someone who wasn't entirely sure. She handed him a folded report. "The man you caught. His name's Victor Melnick. Eastern European background, record across 3 states. He's connected to 2 other cases, both involving children." Daniel nodded slowly. "So Emily wasn't lying?" "No," Dwyer replied, leaning against the column beside him. "She was another one of his runners. We've got her in protective custody now. She's talking." For a while, neither of them said anything. The station's PA system announced departures in soft, melodic tones, the sound almost sacred in its ordinariness. Then Dwyer added, "You did good work, Mercer. You and that dog of yours." Daniel looked down at Valor, who sat quietly, his ears twitching at the faint sound of a train horn in the distance. "He did most of it," Daniel said. Dwyer smiled faintly. "Yeah, well, I've worked with plenty of partners who didn't listen half as well." They shared a small laugh that faded into something more like reflection. The steady rhythm of life returning to the terminal felt almost like a benediction. A few minutes later, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the quiet. Daniel turned just in time to see a small figure running through the crowd. Noah. The boy's blonde hair caught the sunlight as he dashed toward them, his blue jacket flapping open, eyes bright with excitement. Behind him came his parents, a man and woman in their mid-30s. The father was tall, with a strong build and neatly trimmed beard, wearing a dark flannel shirt and the tired, grateful expression of a man who'd spent weeks searching for his son. The mother, petite with chestnut hair tied back loosely, carried the delicate beauty of someone who'd aged a decade in worry but hadn't lost her warmth. Tears shimmered in her hazel eyes as she hurried behind her boy. Noah reached Daniel first, slowing only when he got close to Valor. He knelt down, arms open. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said softly. Valor tilted his head, and Noah hugged him tight, burying his face in the shepherd's fur. "You're my hero," the boy whispered. Valor stayed perfectly still, his tail thumping lightly against the floor, as if he understood every word. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tightening. Noah's father approached and extended a hand. "Mr. Mercer," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "There aren't enough words. Thank you for bringing my son back." Daniel shook his hand firmly. "You should thank him," he said, nodding toward Valor. "I just followed where he led." The man smiled, glancing down at the dog. "Then thank you, Valor," he said sincerely. "You saved my family." His wife wiped a tear and crouched beside her son, running her hand through Noah's hair. "We prayed every night," she said softly, looking up at Daniel. "We asked God to send someone who would listen." Daniel hesitated, then replied quietly, "Maybe he sent a dog instead." That made her smile through her tears. Dwyer stood a few feet away, watching the scene with an expression that mixed pride and melancholy. She'd seen too many reunions like this to ever grow numb to them. She looked at Daniel. "You sure you're done?" she asked. "Cases like this don't end neatly." Daniel nodded. "I know. But for him, it did." He looked toward Noah, who was laughing now, tugging gently at Valor's collar, as if the dog were his best friend. "That's enough for today." Dwyer nodded once, understanding, then excused herself to brief her team. The sunlight poured stronger through the glass ceiling, filling the space with a golden warmth that washed away the grayness of the night before. Daniel crouched beside Valor, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "You did good, old boy," he said. "You heard what no one else could." Valor blinked slowly, his gaze still fixed on Noah. The boy stood, looked back one last time, and waved. "Bye, Valor. I'll never forget you." His parents guided him toward the exit, their hands resting protectively on his shoulders. Daniel watched them go until they disappeared into the morning light spilling across the platform. For a long moment, he stayed there, feeling the weight of silence settle around him. Not heavy, but sacred. The kind of silence that follows after something truly right has happened. When Dwyer returned to gather her notes, she found Daniel still standing with Valor at his side, both facing the sunrise. "You ever think about going back in?" she asked. Daniel smiled faintly without turning. "I never left," he said. Dwyer gave a small nod, then walked off to join her team. As the crowd swelled again with travelers, Daniel took one last look around the terminal. The people, the light, the ordinary peace. He breathed in the scent of coffee and rain and quiet redemption. Then he reached down and scratched Valor behind the ears. "Come on, partner," he said softly. "Let's go home." The two walked out together, their shadows stretching long across the marble floor as the city began another day. Somewhere behind them, a child's laughter echoed faintly, like the last note of a prayer that had been heard. Sometimes God doesn't send thunder or angels to save us. He sends something quieter, a faithful heart, a brave soul, a loyal dog who can hear what no one else can. In a world that rushes too fast to listen, maybe the real miracles are the ones whispered between heartbeats, a child's silent cry, a veteran's courage, a bond that can't be broken. If you believe that God still works through ordinary people and moments like these, share this story. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and join us in praying for every child still waiting for a miracle tonight. May the Lord bless you, protect your family, and remind us all that even in the noise of life, His whispers are never lost. Like, share, and subscribe to help us tell more stories of faith, courage, and redemption. Because sometimes, the smallest signal can save the biggest soul.